about, we were discussing this point earlier, too, is that what if people that worked in the public sector made more money, and so then it wasn't as tempting, it wasn't as lucrative to go into the private sector? What do you guys think of that?
I'm not sure that would solve the issue, because then they would just offer them more money. I think that, what is wrong with a contract that says if you're working in our government, you can't go work for any place that you're going to be able to use these things that this knowledge that you have to give an unfair advantage, to other people. It just doesn't make sense to me that that's even allowed. Companies do it all the time.
They're too scared, right? There are certain limits. I think that if you leave the house, then you have to wait a year before you can become a lobbyist.
But, what is a year?
It's 2 years. It's nothing.
Yeah,
it's nothing.
It's nothing, right? What if it's 10 years?
What if it is 10 years, though? But
10 years.
Yeah.
They would have a lot different capabilities maybe 10 years from then, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me to allow. It's almost like having insider secrets, like insider trading on Wall Street.
W.T. Eppington says if the benefits package is tempting enough, people would work for the devil.
I think that's probably, sadly enough, is a good point.
I think if the promise of the benefits package is good enough, people might work for the devil without even seeing the results. That just brings back up the piece that we were talking about, within the original segment itself, this idea of apathy in the American public, and where when we start talking about how inside all of this feels, do people feel like, you know what, this is just one of those things? Is this one of those pieces of the broken machine that people feel is more untouchable than other pieces? Like, well, that'll never change. We can't do anything about that.
I just filled up my car with gas because we just had a hurricane, and so I was thinking we might have to evacuate. So I went and filled up with gas, and it was 50 cents higher than it was 3 days before. Okay, so this is infuriating. Who do I go to?
Yeah.
What do I do?
Good question.
At what point did we stop feeling enfranchised in the government? Because I don't actually remember a period in my life where I felt, if I have a grievance, I can just, I can go into the Hart office building and talk to my representative and get something done. Now, I can leave a message, and they'll send me a picture to my home address, and that'll be great. But I understand these people are very busy. But at what point, was there a point in American history where we felt enfranchised in what we do? What do I have besides my one vote?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And a lot of people feel like that doesn't even mean anything.
And this is where the great social movements of our country have come into play over the course of our history. Excuse me, the women's franchise, the civil rights movement. But today you don't see people mobilizing. We saw Occupy Wall Street, but of course, there was no great unifying force of Occupy Wall Street. Do you guys think that we can have some sort of movement in this day and age that will get people to rally around these issues, particularly the ones we're talking about today, money in politics and poverty, war on drugs, things that our politicians aren't talking about? What is it going to take to get people to actually stand up, march on Washington and get our elected officials to pay attention?
Well,
Sorry, take this.
Yeah, sorry to miss you.
I've actually been fairly involved with the Occupy Wall Street movement, and I think that it's going to take a while because people need to learn how to unite together under a certain thing that they feel like they can actually change, right? So that's going to take time, because people right now are just waking up and understanding that this has been happening. So many people have lived under this umbrella of propaganda that has, basically said you don't have a voice, and they've created it so we don't have a voice, right? So to a lot of people it feels like it doesn't matter, but with a unifying force of people, you can, do things like the movements of the civil rights movement and the women's right to vote. If you think about it, when they started, women having the right to vote, they had no power at all to make that happen, right? Yeah. So it's the force of the people uniting together, changing social norms, saying this is not okay. It is absolutely not okay. Our politicians are supposed to be public servants. They are supposed to work for the people, not for the corporations.
You have to start somewhere, right? Let me just show you one comment, too, Tori. This one comes from Erin Oliver, who was on the show earlier, and she's from Oakland, also involved in the Occupy movement. And so, you know, one of the things that we have seen with Occupy is they've taken more targeted actions, whether it was Occupy foreclosures or Occupy Our Homes, they were calling it. Or here, she said, stop banking at J.P. Morgan and Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, get a credit union. People can start there. You know, there was a day last year which was, you know, move your money from the large banks. Do you think that that's a good first step to at least try to hold some of the, you know, the 5 big banks in the country accountable?
It certainly sends a message.
I definitely think that things like that can make a huge difference. I think that, you know, if you talk about the organic food versus GMOs, just buying more organic when you can, just doing these small things in your day-to-day life can affect big change, because when many people do those, then it shifts the way that the corporations think about what they're doing, right? So, I mean, and I've actually seen with the bigger banks, they've tried to do things to keep customers, because there was such a big influx of people going to credit unions during that Move Your Money that even U.S. Bank changed their stance on certain things for their customers. So I think it can make a big difference.
Yeah, I think it's these small movements that you can make, but as you say, it's when you can and where you can, because of course buying organic foods is more expensive, but buying the hybrid cars, I mean, the hybrid car is a good case. It was something that we've had the technology for a while, but it was so ridiculously expensive that you couldn't afford it. You couldn't afford it. But I think the call for it was great enough that the price kept coming down the more that would get produced, and that you can actually buy one now on a, you know, kind of on par with a regular, you know, a gas emission car. And I think the same thing will happen. I mean, I think that the Occupy movement has been great, and I hope its gains, as modest as they were, will continue, because I think we saw a lot of people out there, and it's not just a youth movement, and it's not just a left-wing movement. It's a movement by a lot of people who, again, you know, to go back to this idea of people who feel disenfranchised and alienated from the government or from America, which is, you know, and sometimes they're labeled as anti-American or unpatriotic, and that's horrible. These are the things that people should be fighting for. These guys are important to us.
I just want to thank you. We're going to have to wrap it up right here, but I wanted to thank you, too, for being here and being a part of this, for commenting originally on this and continuing this conversation with us.
Thanks so much for joining us, guys.
Yeah, and I hope you stick around for our after party tonight, you know, after the RNC at about 10:30 Eastern.
After the party, there's the after party.
Yeah, so
it's not going to be much of a party from what I've seen so far.
No, but on HuffPost Live, it'll be a party. Real quick, one last comment from somebody who's in the comments right now, Roland's Xavier Pulliam. We can't claim the sky's falling when we're voting people into office who pass policy that's detrimental to the nation. Blaming this and that is easy to do, but we got to accept some of the blame as well. I actually disagree with you, because when you have a system where a third of the people aren't voting, and for reasons like the ones we're seeing now, that people are being disenfranchised and the barriers to voting in this country are so great, this is a good argument once our election system has been reformed. But at this point, and yes, there is apathy, there's no doubt about that, but we have to reform our election system before we can put the blame entirely on the American voters.